Hey, Jesus Loves You, and today I'm going to be reading you Chapter 4 of Diaries of a Holy Night, the in-between. It is called Crazy. The sun began its nightly descent as the group left the woods and strode out onto a dirt path. They moved quickly northward, following a river called the Great River, which spread into a lake just northwest of them. The weather outside of the woods was cooler by almost 20 degrees. It was so noticeable that it made the boys shiver, but not the Simps, who were completely accustomed to it. The landscape was something right out of an outdoors magazine. Thick woods stood on either side of the sizable rushing waters, with green grass on the forest side of the trail. Groups of birds and a herd of deer drank from the sandy river's edge. As they walked, they would pass large groups of Simp soldiers heading in the direction they left. The armed warriors grabbed their tails ever so slightly at Aaron. He returned the gesture, holding his tail just long enough until they were out of sight. The boys guessed that this was a way to respect Aaron as the chief's son, and he back to them. Even though their journey was of utmost importance, the mood of the group was enjoyable. Aaron asked few questions because they seemed very interested in listening to Justin as he told them of how dogs acted in Gulf Shores, finding his stories hilarious. Hours had passed since they appeared in this world, and the boys found themselves hungry. Aaron must have noticed this as well because he fell back a pace and pulled some dog bones from his pouch for them to eat. The teens weren't ungrateful exactly, just a little put off about eating dog food since Justin had eaten worse and his stomach sounded like an angry lion. He took a bite. Mike scrutinized his before also taking a bite. Both were delighted to find that the bones tasted like chicken jerky. This was a very pleasant surprise. Along the way, Aaron mentioned that they would not be taking a huge suspension bridge that crossed the Great River Lake just miles away that would get the travelers over to Central Simperon Woods immediately. But the guards of the bridge had passed them earlier on their way to battle, leaving this location right before an ambush, which Aaron was certain would happen. This seemed to bother the warriors. They protested the idea because of the extra time and lives it would waste to go around. Aaron broke the argument by telling them that heading north first would also bring additional reinforcements from the Simps that lived along the river in the port towns. He also reminded them that his word was final. They continued to march to the north with a weird tension among the group. Past the unattended bridge without another word on it. One of the warriors curiously stopped to mark some trees, but the teens saw him do something like carving into them instead. Aaron, up ahead, was none the wiser. Night had arrived, bringing a cool autumn's chill. The group of adventurers exited the path onto a sandy beach along the Simperon River, a tributary of the Great River and the forked North River. Not far off the road to the right was a small tribal port town built in a marsh. As they approached the town, the boys began to grow excited. A hope grew inside of them as they wondered if they might stumble upon the rest of their group here. Whereas the Simps were only excited about what type of trees they could mark. The town itself had a thick interwoven tree wall that encased the ground surrounding it toward the woods, leaving a path large enough around the town for carts to pass by. An old Simp guard dressed in a dirty cloak greeted them from his makeshift hut. His guard post of sorts was built into the wall near the entrance like a doghouse. He lifted his torch to survey the group, sniffed them, and almost fell over, grabbing his tail, when he recognized Aaron. Aaron quickly moved forward, grabbing the guard aside into his shack to converse in private. After a few moments, they reappeared. The guard, now wearing armor like the soldiers on the beach, ran in the direction of the battle in the southeast, never minding the trail. The group slipped into the town through a door in the guard's shack. They walked through the cobblestone streets. The boys saw that the town's occupants lived in large tents of varying different colors banded together. The streets were lit with thin trees that had burning lanterns at the top like street lamps. Even at this hour, there were still a few simps hanging about. Each of them cast questioning glances at the humans as they passed. The boys weren't the only ones to find this weird, because Aaron was giving them the oddest looks back. The banded tents stopped with single tent merchants, fish market stalls, and even an amazing smelling bakery tent, the smell of which carried throughout the area near the far wall that smelled delightfully like fresh apple pie. At the end of the town was something completely different: a human bar. From a distance, it looked like any you would see in a deserted suburb after being hit by a hurricane. It stood 2 stories tall, with yellowish broken windows and an age-worn patches of paint. There's no way in there. They could hear rough voices coming from inside. It had a sign above the front door that read "Trading Company," and it was open. "Whose establishment is that?" Mike asked, pointing at the house. "That looks like an extremely dilapidated human building." Aaron appeared nervous before answering. "The guard told me that's where a group of human traders recently moved in under false pretenses and were causing all kinds of trouble for him. They trade with all sorts, even the Devma." Mike spoke excitedly. "They're human? That's great. Maybe they know where the rest of our friends are, or how to get home." "Wherever you are, when you arrive in this world, this becomes your home," Aaron replied. "And you should stay away from the likes of them. They're dangerous, and we haven't the time to deal with them now." "Nonsense," Mike raved. "I'm sure it's different for us. Like, we can leave once we get to a certain door, or we meet up with our group again, and we just click our heels together and say, 'I love grits,' and poof, we're back at the church. At the very least, he can direct us to the angel that needs to be rescued." "An angel is in trouble?" Aaron asked, as his whole disposition changed. "Why did you tell us that in the first place?" Mike took this chance to enter the trading company's door. Justin shook his head and followed after him. The rest of the group stacked up closely behind. Aaron slipped Justin a weapon intended to be a sword, but was just a big knife in the boy's hands. Its edges were serrated and the blade glowed lightly, much like the simp armor. There was no metal like this on Earth. The bar was almost as dark as it was outside. It looked much like a Western-type saloon inside, with lamps burning dimly in the 4 corners of the building. A broken chandelier hung from the ceiling with just one of its bulbs working. But there were not electrical lines anywhere, so where did it get its power? The simp weapons were the only other lights in the building. Through the doors, a counter with a cash register stood stationary with a tall man leaning against it. A black hooded sweatshirt covered his slender frame and half of his face. Long silver hair was visible underneath the hood pulled over his left eye. His other eye was mysteriously red and stared intently at Mike as he approached. There didn't seem to be a single simp anywhere in the vicinity. In the back of the house, 4 filthy men played cards, drank black liquid, and yelled loudly at each other. There were mangled rooms upstairs where 3 pirate-looking men were passed out. They were visible through a hole in the ceiling, piled on the floor, snoring loudly. Mike almost yelled as he jogged toward the hood man. "I'm so glad to see another human! Can you please tell me how to get home? Between you and me, this crowd is a little less than pedigree, if you catch my meaning. They're dogs. I'm certain you do." The man leaned forward, causing the house to go quiet. Even the snores. His body went very rigid and his arms flexed as if fighting to control something. A vein ran the length of his neck up into his forehead as he strained his eye on the group. The card players in the back stopped to stare as well. "Who are you?" the hooded man asked with a sinister, deep voice. "I've never seen you before." Mike beamed excitedly as he grabbed a hold of Justin's arm, dragging him forward. "Where are my manners? I'm Mike Prickles, and this lower-class individual is Justin Smith. We seem to be stuck here, and we desperately would like to return home. Can you help us with our request? Or maybe you can help us locate the celestial being we need to find." The hooded man's red eye flashed excitedly from Mike to Justin. With the glint of a smile, he moved slowly around the counter, approaching Mike. He said, "Oh, I can help you get exactly where you need to go." The men in the back got to their feet, hard looks painted on their faces. There was a rustle from upstairs as the old men woke up and stared down through the hole. Deep in Justin's stomach was a torrent of unease. The man stared down at Mike and within an instant had drawn a hidden pistol. With a flash, Aaron knocked the pistol out of his hand, causing it to go off into the door behind them. The warriors trained their bows on him as Aaron lunged forward with his sword aimed at the hooded man's chest. He caught the sword in his left hand, revealing that his hand was made of black stone. Aaron yelled, "Darkened ones! Darkened ones!" The men in the back bolted forward, wielding their swords. Aaron tripped the hooded man over as the warriors standing closest to him loosed their arrows, pinning 3 of the men in the back to the wall. The men on the second floor hopped downstairs through the hole, one of which landed into a warrior's sword. The 2 human groups converged, causing Aaron to quickly pull his soldiers into the world's smallest shield wall. From his position, the chief's son perceived that the enemy's attention was directed at his group, not the children, which is what he preferred. To continue holding the enemy's attention, he decided to draw the fight outside. The men, although unwise to Aaron's plan, pushed it outside all on their own. This left the biggest and dumbest man with the kids. This clearly intoxicated guy grunted as he hobbled forward from the table. He had a face that was half concrete demon, was so big his head shaved the ceiling, so fat that his stomach stuck way out, and his left arm was a twisted mass of jagged concrete. His legally too small tank top was covered in black liquid. He trained a double-barreled flintlock shotgun on the red-haired boy. Both barrels unloaded at Mike, creating 2 large holes in the floor directly to the teen's left. Apparently, that man was a terrible shot when drunk. Mike yelped falling over in fear only to find the large man standing over him, pointing the jagged mass of stone in his face. "Time to die, Christian filth," the man roared as he pulled his arm back to kill Mike. Behind this harrowing scene, Justin watched in fear, but something powerful was stirring inside of him. He couldn't quite explain it, but he really wanted to fight that thing. Like doing that would somehow make up for not being able to protect everything he cared for not protecting his sister. His eyes narrowed and he started to smile. Justin ran forward and thrust his knife wildly at the man. It stuck into its chest like a stick in mud, sinking the blade all the way to the hilt. His own actions frightened him. To fight so violently against such a foe scared him, not because of the threat of death, but because he really liked it. His smile widened. The man stumbled backwards, screaming in agony. He growled as he pulled the knife out, tossing it to the ground with disgust. Instead of blood, black oil poured out like a faucet. He grabbed Justin up, no longer interested in Mike, and repeatedly punched the boy as hard as he physically could. Odd as it was, the boy was still smiling. The punches didn't hurt even a little. Justin's fear was gone. A new light shined in the room, coming from Justin's chest. He looked down, and inside his chest was a small, bright throne with Jesus sitting on it. The light, although dim to him, blinded the others in the room. The men in the back began to hiss and claw at their bodies, trying to escape, ripping through their skin, revealing that they were actually demonic Devma beasts. The large man, squinting fiercely, grabbed Justin by the hair. His fingers were intertwined into the boy's thick black locks. Justin was done playing around now. Mike stood by aghast at what he was witnessing. "Have a nice fight," Justin said, smiling as large as physically possible before kicking the large man in the crotch, sending him through the wall in pieces. The last portion of the man's face looked contorted in pain before it disappeared into dust. Mesmerized by his newfound power, Justin jumped with lightning-like reflexes towards the Devma in the back. Before this moment, he was incredibly afraid of these hideous beasts killing the simp soldiers on the beach. But now he bore a dazzling smile, enjoying the fight. He delivered multiple punches, crushing their tortured faces. But they were still alive. His attacks weren't working. Then Aaron called out in his puppy voice from outside, "Devma can only be killed by the light. This sword is made from holite steel, which is blessed by God's blessed light, something sharper than any two-edged sword." Justin looked to where his knife lay on the ground, still glowing, covered in oil. A flash of light swept past him, causing him to briefly turn around. Back to the fight, he witnessed an even brighter light than his standing over the broken ash piles where the Devma used to be. It was Mike. His chest also bore Jesus and was radiating light like an inferno. But something was off. Mike stared at the knife in his hand in disbelief. Even though the young redhead had defeated the Devma, he was still very much afraid. Until now, the only battles he had been in were with his older sister over access to the bathroom. These distracted thoughts seemed to affect his chest's blaze, which now turned to embers. It was only on impulse that Mike had leapt for the blade at all. His speed and strength were miraculous bonuses. Somehow, one of the men from the fight outside had made his way back inside with no less than 30 arrows stuck in his back. After he saw the discord on Mike's face, he pulled a pistol from his waistband and fired it at the boy. Justin noticed this happen out of the corner of his eye. Within a millisecond, he jumped in front of the bullets with his amazing speed and defended Mike. The bullets never reached him. They were all caught by the light radiating from his body like a bulletproof blanket. Noticing Mike's apprehension, Justin pulled the knife from his grasp, slashed through the pistol-wielding man, turning him to dust, leapt outside, and with 3 swings, ended the fight. By the end, there was only the hooded man hiding behind the corner left. Justin returned with the Simps to finish his life. "Stop!" the hooded man yelled as the smiling teen picked him up with one hand, holding him above his head, with his face staring down at him. "I didn't know you were holy knights. We wouldn't dream of fighting people as powerful as you. Please, just let me go and you'll never see me again. I promise. Please." By this time, the whole town had come out to the bar with torches lit and weapons drawn. Aaron looked at Justin with a look of awe before summoning the warriors back outside to calm the crowd. "The rest is in your hands," Aaron said to the teens as he left. Justin smiled into the face of the cursed man. I don't know what a holy knight is, or a high protector, or whatever that is, but what I do know is that you tried to kill us. So explain to me why I shouldn't kill you. "You're crazy," the man yelled so violently that his hood fell back to reveal that the other half of his face had turned into black Devma stone. "You're talking about murdering me. You've already killed other people tonight, you murderer. You're going to hell for this." Justin was deeply affected by the man calling him a murderer. Moments ago, he didn't just fight the enemy. He had taken human life. He really was a murderer. But was he seriously going to hell? Wasn't he saved? And didn't that mean that Jesus had washed away all of his sins? Or was that just before he got saved? Would a saved person murder another person? As he listened and doubted, his light began to fade. Justin closed his eyes with disgust, causing his smile to disappear. He let the Devma man fall to the ground as he felt weakness spread throughout his body. The man noticed this and shouted all the louder as he took another hidden pistol from his hoodie, this one aimed at Justin's forehead. Falling deeper into despair with every word that resounded in his mind, the man's voice suddenly disappeared. The haze that had clouded his mind was gone. He opened his eyes to find the source of his peace. Mike had plunged a bright, burning sword deep into the right eye of the darkened man. The man fell to the ground. He crawled along the floor, spilling oil from his eye all the way to the entrance. At the door, he turned from his attacker to the warriors closest to Aaron and mouthed the words, "Help me," before exploding to dust. The boys were the only ones that noticed this, as the others were far too busy trying to calm the hysteria occurring on the street. Mike looked over at Justin, now laying on the floor, crying with a new sense of respect. He sat next to him and said quietly, "You know he's right." Justin looked over at him as he wiped the tears from his cheek. "About what?" "You are crazy," Mike teased as he slapped Justin on the shoulder. Justin hung his head in despair. "Not now." "No, you idiot. You saved my life," Mike said, his eyes aglow. "You charged that huge guy like a barbarian and protected me when I was paralyzed by fear. And I'm very thankful that God put you here with me, or else I would most definitely be deceased. You are crazy. My crazy protector. So thank you." "Oh," Justin stammered with a smile. No problem." The teens laughed as they each recounted how awesome the other had been during the conflict. A large piece of the second floor crashed into the floor next to them, causing them to hastily exit the bar. They left that dismal place more men than mere boys. Not so much travelers in this world. but warriors who could defend themselves. More than fighters, heroes.